Chelsea from the Arcane Library, and I'm here for a walkthrough of The Horror Within. Oh yeah. This is an 8th level one-shot, and it's horror themed, as you might have known from the title, as well as the fact that it's included in the Bundle of Horror 2, a set of 4 horror themed one-shots. And so you can pick this up as an individual adventure or in the Bundle of Horror 2 on my website, thearcanelibrary.com. But now, I want to walk you through the exciting events of The Horror Within. So, this adventure, again, 8th level characters, and this is a very cosmic horror themed adventure. This one has some Lovecraftian influence, perhaps the most out of any adventure that I've ever written, and so it was a ton of fun. And here is the background now on this one. So what's happening here? There is a theater in the city that the characters are in. And so the characters will probably need to start in a city or near a city that they're familiar with. And the theater is called the Monveau Theater. Now this is a sort of aging theater. It was once considered one of the best stages in the city, but now it's a bit out of vogue, a bit decrepit. And so in an attempt to bring some life back into the theater, they hired an up-and-coming new playwright named Bertrand Gilliard. And he's very talented, and he wrote a debut play called The Threads of Fate that was very successful. So now he has sort of got some pressure on him to write another great and successful play. And that's leading into what happened in this adventure. So Bertrand spent a year uninspired and trying to come up with some ideas. And he took to wandering in the tunnels that are beneath the theater. There's always a tunnel beneath something in D&D, right? I mean, is there never not a tunnel? But no, but in reality, because this is a city, it's been built atop the ruins of other cities as it's grown. And so Bertrand was able to access some of these underground sort of like catacombs and tunnels, very much like the catacombs and tunnels underneath Paris. And that is what inspired these, in fact. And he wandered around the ancient halls trying to come upon some ideas and some inspiration, and he eventually did find something there. He found a book. He found an ancient tome. It promised cosmic insights, and so he read it. And its true purpose actually was to break the minds of those who read it and cause them to learn a ritual to pull an old one into the prime material plane. So, inspired by madness, Bertrand wrote his magnum opus play in just a week, and it was called The Horror Within. And that play was actually a sort of theatricized version of this ritual. And so on debut night, Bertrand and his cast summoned an old one into the theater right in front of an entire audience, snapping the minds of everybody who saw it and driving them all irrevocably mad. And so this is where our adventure begins. The synopsis of the adventure is that the characters have an NPC who they care about. I wrote one into the adventure, or you could replace this with another one who fits, who attended opening night of this play and is now crazy. And so the family of that NPC asks the characters to find out what happened, if there's any way that this can be undone. And so the characters go to the Monveau Theater, explore it, and find out what happened here as they accumulate hints and clues, and then they eventually descend into the halls beneath the theater to confront the Old One, Shagolg, who was summoned and is now driving everybody more and more mad throughout the city with its presence. So here's our very first encounter in the adventure Tea and Terror, where the characters are invited over to the house of the Lang family. Unless you want to substitute in another NPC, the NPC should have some connections to a university and some connections maybe to theater or the occult, so that there's a good reason why they were at this play and why they can offer the certain prizes and rewards that they're offering. So Olivia tells the characters what happened and how her husband came home that night and he was no longer himself, and she's had to lock him up in the cellar simply to muffle his screaming, which is endless, and his raving. So she gives the characters the adventure hooks, appeals to reward heroism and discovery. There's some cool rewards offered here. Rewards are not always monetary. In fact, they're rarely monetary in these adventures. One of the big rewards that the characters are offered here is an honorary professorship at the local university, which would give them access to faculty-only books and artifacts, the university's library and its sort of hidden sections, as well as a fair amount of esteem in the city. So I thought that was a pretty cool reward, and one that hopefully will entice some or all of your characters. And so then the other thing to note about this adventure, it uses a Sanity Points system. And lots of different horror-based adventures use Sanity Points, but the difference here with D&D is that in D&D, the final outcome of just going irrevocably mad and dying is not that satisfying. It's satisfying in other game systems where people know that's the goal, but in D&D, the game itself is more about kind of triumphing. So I created my own Sanity Point system here to allow creeping madness and sort of allow characters to see their descent toward madness, but the adventure is not about going mad and dying. It's about triumphing over the evils that happened here and maybe accumulating some madness along the way, some interesting problems and quirks that the characters could either live with or try to get sorted out afterwards. So I have a sidebar here about sanity points, and then Appendix C in this adventure is about how those sanity points work. So going forward now into the adventure, the characters hopefully agree to go to the Monveau Theater. And the first encounter actually happens outside of the theater here. It's the closed indefinitely encounter. The City Watch has closed the theater down because they don't know what to do with it. They investigated this strange happening by sending in an investigator team, and that team has yet to reemerge. And so the City Watch is not sure really how to proceed. They're trying to figure it out, and until they really come up with a plan, they've shut the theater down. So the characters will have to essentially sneak into the theater while contending with a madman who decided to sort of position himself outside of the theater, Robalt. He was either in the audience the first night or just being so close to the Great Old One has driven him mad. And he has killed the guard and is now friends with the guard. And so the characters will have to handle him delicately and figure out, how to cut a balance between upsetting Robald and getting into the theater. And this also sets up the idea of horror and madness and its ramifications in this adventure. So once the characters get inside the theater, they will be greeted with I love this map, this super cool map of the Monveau Theater and its various locations. I think it's going to be fun for the characters to explore. And their first encounter inside the theater is the entry halls, exploring sort of the auditorium section. There's a roll table of clues that the characters can find because there's so many little individual places that they could explore in this theater that however much or however little time they want to spend on it, I wanted to give you a bunch of different cool options for what to give the characters. Some of these clues happen automatically if the characters go into a specific location, and some of them cause the characters to lose sanity points or potentially lose them. Characters could also find cool treasure or some cool thematic stuff, according to whatever you roll or choose off that table. So, once the characters approach the stage, they'll notice that there's a strange summoning circle with eldritch symbols carved on it. Inspecting it explains a bit about what it does while also provoking some madness. And then not long after the characters do that, the air grows cold and then this terrible monster called a void spawn crawls through. In fact, 3 of them crawl through the summoning circle and attack the characters. This is the first concrete sign that something completely cosmic and weird is going on. And so this was a pretty cool encounter in a big, cool auditorium, and I wanted the first encounter that the characters had with something truly supernatural to be this like big and stunning moment. So there's a chance that the characters could accumulate a little bit of madness from this particular encounter as well. So once that fight is done, the characters may explore further. They may go back behind the stage. Hopefully they do, because that's how the adventure continues. And so there are some things that they'll encounter behind the scenes. One of the City Watch investigators is back here. she has accumulated some madness and believes that she's trapped inside the room that the characters find her in. So they have the chance to help her and maybe get some information from her that would be useful later on. And then the characters may go into Bertrand's office and they'll discover the tome that he found, a big clue about what's going on. And they'll discover a trapdoor that leads down to the tunnels beneath the city. And so by doing a bit of exploring, they'll probably have a pretty good idea about what's going on at this point. But now it's about how can they solve this problem. So when the characters go down into the tunnels, there isn't a ton of like tunnel exploration. I actually didn't do a map of all the tunnels because that's sort of a narrative transition in my opinion. The characters go down through the tunnels, and the tunnels, no matter how they explore it, do eventually converge on a central point, which is this underground cathedral. So the characters will eventually find their way to this underground cathedral, and that's where the final encounter happens. The Dreams and Phantoms. So in this room, there's the cast of the play, and they're all wearing cloaks. They're all crazy. And Bertrand Gilliard, the playwright, is there directing the worship of the mighty being Shagog, who is actually pictured on the very front of the adventure, this massive, inky blot. And the characters Bertrand will invite them to worship Shagog. I doubt that they'll join in. They might. That's always an option, but they probably won't. And so then we would move into a combat. Also, Shagog was super fun to write. I actually tweeted about this and was laughing because when I was writing this adventure, I was like, innocent bystanders exploding and turning into gibbering mouthers. Is that too gross? And it's kind of gross, but that's actually what Shagog does. So Shagog has legendary actions and standard actions, some of which are being able to turn innocent bystanders who are worshiping him into gibbering mouthers. So he does that right from the beginning. He explodes Bertrand and maybe one other of his worshippers, and there are also 2 other gibbering mouthers scooting around the room. So the point of the gibbering mouthers is to provide some terrain difficulty and some impediment to the characters and just directly frontal assault on Shagog. But ultimately, that's what they will have to do to triumph, is defeat Shagog. And so you have new creatures in this adventure, the Void Spawn from the theater, and then you have Shagog, the Writhing Clot, who is a lesser old one, but still an old one, with some very Cthulhu-y abilities, very Lovecraftian abilities, and history, and even its presence is maddening to people. So if the characters have not already accumulated 1 or 2 madness quirks at this point, they're likely to get 1 or 2 here. And then they'll have to fight it out with Shagog and hopefully defeat this elder thing. And if they do, then we move on to the Aftermath section, where it talks about what happens when Shagog is defeated. So people who his presence drove mad, they eventually return back to sanity over the next few days. The City Watch will be grateful to the characters for figuring this out and perhaps saving one of their own. That character they met earlier who thought she was trapped in the room. And the tome, the characters will have to decide what, if anything, to do with that tome. They can read it. It functions as a tome of clear thought and has some other cool abilities that make it an artifact level item. And that also leads into several future adventure hooks. Just dealing with the tome itself might be a full adventure. Trying to keep it safe from other cultists or people who pursue the characters who want that tome, that would be an interesting outcome. Professor Lang, who was originally one of those driven insane at the beginning of this adventure, finally returns to his senses, and he's an occult expert in the city, and so he might end up reaching out to the characters again at some point, because they've proven themselves, and helping. He might need their help in dealing with some other cultish things that are going down in the city. So lots of future adventure hooks coming out of this one. And that is it. That's the end of the Horror Within 8th level adventure. I hope you guys check it out. As always, if you do, please let me know what you think. I love hearing stories about how these adventures go for your groups, what happens, all the crazy shenanigans and outcomes, things that I could never have predicted. And that's the whole story. And then finally, I thought this was worth mentioning too. I'm actually, because we're talking about Cthulhu type things, I'm wearing a shirt that's going to be for sale on my website very soon. In fact, the same time that the Bundle of Horror goes up. And as you can see, this is an underground beholder creature, and this is a blinded beholder, and its central eye might look familiar to you. It's actually the basis of where the Arcane Library logo came from. And this shirt kind of tells an untold story about the history, in my mind, the headcanon for the actual Arcane Library. And so this blinded beholder with its anti-magic central eye plays a big role in how I came up with the idea of the Arcane Library, and he is actually one of the basis NPCs for the whole thing. So I thought it was kind of cool. It's very Halloween themed. It's very like Cthulhu themed, and I just thought it would be really neat to put this out there at this time. So you can check those out on my website too, thearcanelibrary.com. All right, everybody, thanks so much for watching. I hope you roll a lot of crits unless you're the DM, in which case only a few. Don't be killing too many PCs. And I'll talk to y'all later. All right, thanks. Bye.